Hello and welcome to Spread Book Joy. This is part 2 in my series of why adults read children's fiction. If you're new to the channel, I'm Jack. If you're not new, welcome back to Spread Book Joy, and this is part 2 of a series. So if you haven't watched part 1, I'm going to link it in the description box below. This is all about why adults read children's fiction. I'm not going to go into the preamble, so I'm assuming you've come straight over from my other video. So let's get into it. So next up, I've got a clip from Julie from The Hungry Bookworm.
Hello there, my name is Julie and welcome back to my channel. This is The Hungry Bookworm. Now today I'm on Jack's channels from Spread Book Joy, as you know, because you're there already. It's a really interesting subject and I have made a video about it, talking briefly as to why I personally read middle grade books or kids books. I think it was the summer. It could be the year before. I can't remember actually, that I picked up my first middle grade book and I really enjoyed it. It was Wonderscape by Jennifer Bell, and I have talked a lot about it, and I still after reading many other middle grades, still class it as one of my absolute favourites. As an adult reader, I don't enjoy fantasy for adults. I don't know why. I struggle with a lot of the books. I mean, I enjoy watching, but reading, I really struggle. I don't know why, but when it's kids' books and it's fantasy, I really enjoy it. I don't know what it is. Perhaps it's a simpler type of fantasy, but I don't know. I really enjoy middle grade books. They're just quite freeing, I think. If I'm struggling to find something to read, I'll pick up one of my many that I've collected, and you know, I get into the book. They're easy to read and they're not convoluted, put it that way. The font and the typesetting way and the way they are printed with gorgeous illustrations, I just absolutely love them. They're an escape. It's kind of an escapism. Yes, okay, the main characters are of the age that the book is targeted to, and sometimes that's a little bit of an issue because they've written them to be quite cantankerous at times, or quite sort of pre-teen, I know what I'm doing type of thing. But I have to say the majority of them have been really quite pleasant. They take me away to another land half the time, because a lot of the middle grade books that I do read are adventure, exploration and fantasy, and yeah, they just take me away to another place where I can sit and read, and I don't have to bother what's going on outside my front door for a moment. I can just settle back and fall into some gorgeous adventures. I also like the fact that you can read them quite quickly. Some contemporary books take a long time to read and I get bored with them. I've never got bored with a middle grade, because you can actually whiz through a middle grade book in a day sometimes. I mean, I have done it, but it's not the main reason why. I don't know, I just really enjoy them. I love illustrations in books. They're just amazing. They help tell the story, I believe. And you know, when you're reading a character and then you turn the page and there they are looking at you, I think you can connect with them even more, and that's what I really like. That is why I like to read middle grade. So thank you, Jack, for allowing me to come onto your wonderful channel, and yeah, pop on over to my channel, because I talk lots of middle grade too. Bye.
So in Julie's clip, she talks about a lot of the similar things that the last two clips talked about, but she also talks about what Sue's mentioned, and that is the idea of not just going back to childhood, but escapism, closing your door and escaping and just immersing yourself in a story. So I'm going to link that to what I read about the book by Dr. Louise Joy, and the article is from the Independent newspaper, and I'll link it in the description box below. So I'm just going to quote from the article about why adults read children's books. And Dr. Louise Joy, a Cambridge University academic, believes classic children's books, so in this case they're just talking about classics, but I think all children's literature. Classic children's books and the work they inspire attract older readers because they give them things they cannot find in their everyday lives, including direct communication, tasty home-cooked food, and tolerance towards eccentricity. The researcher claims such books represent a symbolic retreat from the disappointment of reality. Isn't that a really good quote? That's a direct quote from her book, The Symbolic Retreat from the Disappointment of Reality, which is what we were talking about, moving away from adulting and a retreat away from it. I like the fact they mentioned food as well. So home-cooked food. Food in children's books. Katherine Rundell mentioned it in the quote at the beginning, if you noticed. I wanted to think about food. And I do want to do a video on food in children's books because I feel like well-described food was a real feature of all of the books that I loved as a child, and I still notice great food descriptions when I'm reading children's books. So that's an interesting one. But yeah, I like that idea of this. It's not just escapism from adulting, but the escape from the disappointments of reality. So I think that's a really good way of putting it. And that is backed up by Storm Reeds, who says, I read them because they're fun. They are great after you've read something gritty and dark, because a lot of adult fiction, isn't it? It's gritty and dark and real, and there's a lot of realism, sometimes too much realism. And children's books can be like that, can't they? They can be a literary palate cleanser. Another thing that Julie mentioned is that she can often get quite bored with longer adult books, fantasy books. She doesn't read fantasy adult books because she just thinks they're just long and boring and overly descriptive, but in children's fantasy she loves it. And that's another point about children's literature that I wanted to make, and it's the structure of children's books. They are by their nature fast-paced and full of interesting plot. Stuff happens in children's books because when you write for children you need to hold their attention and you have to make things happen, and they have to happen very rapidly. So I'm going to go on to Joan Aiken, and it's just a very quick quote from Joan Aiken, and she said it is impossible to be too speedy at the beginning of a children's book because children need to be grabbed straight away. So if you're looking for something that you can hit the ground running with and enjoy a really good ripping yarn, an adventure story, what's more adventurous than a middle grade, the focus of a children's book? And Katherine Rundell also similarly says, children will not be patient if you pontificate or meander or self-congratulate. Rather, children's fiction necessitates distillation. At its best, it renders in their purest and most archetypal forms hope, hunger, joy, fear. Think of children's books as literary vodka. And going back to that Neil Gaiman essay, he says, when he was writing The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which didn't end up getting published as a children's book, he wasn't sure what it was, so he would write notes for himself. And he says, I would make notes for myself as I wrote it, on scraps of paper and in margins, to try to work out whether I was writing a book for children or for adults, which would not change the nature of the book, but would change what I did with it once it was done, and would initially publish it, and how. There were notes in it that would say things like, in adult fiction, you can leave the boring bits in. And I don't think I can have the scene where his father nearly drowns him in the bath if it's a kid's book, can I? I reached the end of the book and realised that I was as clueless as when I began. Was it a children's book, an adult book, a young adult book, a crossover book, a book? I once wrote the English language script for a beautiful and prestigious foreign animated film and was asked by the film company before I began to try and include some swear words in there somewhere, as they needed to be sure the film had at least a PG-13 certificate. But I don't think it's swearing that makes fiction adult. What makes a book an adult book is, sometimes, that it depicts a world that's only comprehensible if you are an adult yourself. So next I have a clip from Gaia Athena, and she's going to talk about why she reads middle grade.
Hey, my name is Gaia Athena, and I like reading middle grade books. Why wouldn't you? There are so many amazing books out there. I think if a book sounds interesting, you can pick it up, even if it's not in the adult age category, assuming you're an adult watching this. I find middle grade books can be more whimsical than adult books, particularly the fantasy ones. And I enjoy that. They are usually more whimsical and more funny than adult books. Adult books tend to be darker and more serious, and sometimes I really like to read something more whimsical and funny. There are also lots of great middle grade contemporary fiction books, which is one of the genres I also really love to read. Some of these books weren't around when I was growing up, and some of them were, and then it's very nostalgic to read them again. But the ones that weren't are just really fun to read now. And if you, like me, belong to one or multiple minority groups, as a kid I never saw myself in books, and so as an adult I love that now we are seeing middle grade books with representation from minority groups, and I love feeling that recognition in a book. I'm autistic and also belong to several other minority groups, and as a kid I never saw a well-represented autistic character in middle grade books that I read as a kid. So I love that we have that now, and some of those books are some of my favorite books of all time now. Some of these books have such beautiful stories, some of them have important messages, some of them have beautiful illustrations, which is something that adult books often don't have, unless they're like graphic novels. And I love seeing beautiful illustrations in books. It really adds to the reading experience, in my opinion. Not that I would want illustrations in like every book, but I really like seeing them when they are very nice. And yeah, thank you, Jack.
So Gaia talks about the variety of stories, and there is just such a wide variety of concepts and amazing stories that happen in children's books. And if you enjoy reading them, why not pick them up? She also talks about the design aspect. Julie talks about that as well, the absolute pleasure of the design of children's books, and that's one of my reasons that I love them. I think the attention to detail in the publishing industry for children's literature is phenomenal these days. Some of my most beautiful books that I own are children's books. The thought that's gone into them makes the act of reading them that much more joyful and pleasurable. And also, going back to what Gaia was saying about story in children's books, story is everything. Character is important, but story is hugely important, and the stories can be playful and whimsical and fun. I'm not a huge fan of anything too nonsensical, and I don't think a lot of children are actually. I think children like to have good reasons for things happening, but I like the whimsy that you can get in children's literature. So we can often delight in the kind of offbeat quirks of characters and things without questioning it too deeply, which is quite nice. And that leads us to another quote from Katherine Rundell, and she says, children's fiction does something else too. It offers to help us re-find things we may not even know we have lost. Children's fiction can reteach you how to read with an open heart. When you read children's fiction, you are given the space to read again as a child, to find your way back to the time when new discoveries came daily and when the world was colossal, before your imagination was trimmed and neatened as if it was an optional extra. But imagination was not and never has been optional. It is at the heart of everything, the thing that allows us to experience the world from the perspective of others. And then that links back again to what Gaia was saying about representation in modern children's publishing. It's still woefully inadequate in terms of different ethnicities being represented, in terms of girls being represented, in terms of disabilities and sexuality representation. So it's still on its way, but it's a lot more representation in the last few years. It's wonderful to see such books that we wouldn't have seen when we were younger, and from people who are in minority groups to see themselves represented from a young age. It must be absolutely amazing. I watched a video recently. Kevy from Say Kevy, in the last couple of months, read a book, a trans story, a middle grade trans book, and she was brought to tears because if she'd have had something like that to read when she was younger, it would have made just all the difference to her. And equally, talking about issues that they deal with, Amy from BookTube with Amy, she said she'd only started to dip her toes into middle grade, but she finds them super enjoyable. I feel like they deal with real world issues, but in a really easy to manage way, and they're just so magical and fun. I also really love the focus on friendship over romance, and that's nice as well, isn't it? Because sometimes you just want to read about relationships that are purely platonic, and some people read a lot of YA, and there's things like insta love in YA. YA is not necessarily my favourite category of books. On Rosie Cockshut's channel, she mentioned recently that she wanted to get into reading some YA, but she just finds it too YA, if that makes sense. And so I just put forward that actually there is fiction that is YA, so it's aimed at young adults, where you get the annoying insta love and things like that going on, and then there is just good fiction that is marketed as young adult fiction. So it's all around marketing, isn't it? It's all a marketing thing. Last but not least, I'm going to end with a clip from Berna, from Berna's Bookish Adventures, and I think this is just a lovely clip to end on and a lovely point to make.
Hello Bookish friends, I'm Berna from Berna's Bookish Adventures. There are many reasons why I love reading middle grade, but the most important reason for me is that middle grade books always have an element of hope in their structure. Even if the middle grade book touches upon very serious subjects such as disability, racism, abuse, adoption, displacement, and so on, even if very bad things happen in the book, you always feel hopeful when you come to the end of a middle grade book. This lovely feeling of hope that I get from reading middle grade books is my most important reason for reading and loving middle grade.
So that's a lovely message to finish on, isn't it? Berna enjoys reading books about children's books because of the hope that they offer, and we all need a bit of that at this current time, right? So Katherine Rundell says, children's novels to me spoke and still speak of hope. They say, look, this is what bravery looks like. This is what generosity looks like. They tell me through the medium of wizards and lions and talking spiders that this world we live in is a world of people who tell jokes and work and endure. Children's books say the world is huge. They say hope counts for something. They say bravery will matter, wit will matter, empathy will matter, love will matter. For me, when I was talking about why I love children's books, the sheer comfort of knowing that children's books, even the most complex, dark ones, contain seeds of hope and that good will triumph is really vastly comforting, and we link back to that idea of comfort again. Children's books aren't all sunshine and roses. There is darkness, there is complexity, there are morally grey characters, just as there are in adult fiction, or fiction marketed as adult fiction. But the difference being that I know that my emotions will be satisfied at the end of the story, that I'll be taken care of. And I was talking to Shelley about this the other day, and she talked about an element of safety when you read a children's book, that you know going into it, if you're feeling quite emotionally fragile, you know going into a children's book that you may get a bit of heartbreak, but you'll get that feeling of safety. You'll be taken care of. Some of the most heartbreaking children's books I've read, Charlotte's Web makes me cry, Bridge to Terabithia, absolutely tragic, but for some reason when I finish reading them, I'm still left uplifted and with a message of hope. So anyone who sort of says that children's books aren't dark, haven't read a lot of children's books, because they can be very dark, but ultimately they will take care of you emotionally. By the end of it all, there's a sort of satisfying conclusion to them, and usually at the very end a message of hope, regardless of what has gone on throughout the book. And going back to the sort of darkness of children's books, anyone who thinks, because children's lives are not all sunshine and roses, I often say, people who think that childhood is a happy time have forgotten what it's like to be children. It can be a very happy time, but it's also a time when you are powerless. You have no control over your life. And even the very happiest of children are confused and frightened by things that go on in the world. And children's books will offer answers and teach them about these scenarios and these things that go on in the world, but in a safe, managed, controlled way. Joan Aiken talks about the writer's duty. She says, it is the writer's duty to demonstrate to children that the world is not a simple place. Far from it. The world is an infinitely rich, strange, confusing, wonderful, cruel, mysterious, beautiful, inexplicable riddle. We too are a riddle. We don't know where we come from or where we're going. We are surrounded by layers of meaning that we can only dimly apprehend, however much we try to learn. And how much more enjoyable it is for children, how much more it accords with their own observations and instinctive certainties to be told this, than to be told that the world is a flat, tidy, orderly place with everything mapped out and accounted for by computer, with no unexplored regions left, that somewhere, neatly waiting, each person has an identity like a parcel left at the post office to be collected, that the naughty bear who doesn't like playing with other bears has only to be invited to a party and he will soon change his ways. Children need to get from stories they read a sense of their own inner existence and the archetypal links that connect them with the unexplored past, of the similarity and patterns between large and small, old and new. They need to receive something that extends beyond ordinary reality. So why do I read children's literature? I've talked a little bit about it as each point has come up, because each of those points were ones that I wrote down when I was thinking about why I read children's literature. I initially, when I was younger, I would reread old favourites and revisit them for nostalgia reasons. The only children's books I read prior to becoming a teacher as an adult, brand new, were the Harry Potter books and His Dark Materials. I worked in the children's bookshop, and whilst I knew of the books, I would recommend books because I knew what they were and roughly what they were about and how popular they were. I didn't read them for myself. I didn't see it as a professional duty. When I became a teacher, one of my firm beliefs is, aside from children being happy and safe and ready to learn, because their whole sort of personal, social, emotional development is massively important to their learning, the next most important thing I want is for them to become a reader. And becoming a reader and teaching children to read are two entirely different things. Becoming a reader necessitates a love of reading and reading for pleasure and choosing to read. And so you can teach children to read, but teaching them to become a reader is an entirely different prospect. And as a teacher, I know that my knowledge of children's literature has to be key. I have to find the right book for those children. I read a book called Tell Me by Aidan Chambers, and that has been probably the most influential book on children's reading and literature in my entire career that I've read, and I still refer back to. And I used a lot in my master's research, which was all around reading and identity and making readers, and how teachers' reading identities influence the children they teach. And Aidan Chambers said something that's always stuck with me, and the quote is that readers are made by readers. And I started this entire channel down to that idea. And I know that not every teacher has the time nor the inclination to explore children's literature to the depth you would need to be able to recommend that one book that starts someone on a lifelong journey of reading. So that's why I started reading children's literature. So that was what I was going to say about why I started it. What I found as a teacher who's delved deeply into children's literature is I found children's books that I think that's great for those children. That's a good children's book. That's one that I can recommend and have in the memory bank, and I read it. But I've also found just great literature that I've personally enjoyed. I've found an entire rich, deep world of well-written, well thought out, delightful literature that I have fully enjoyed myself. And I found books and authors that I enjoy personally and not just to recommend to children. So I'm going to do a video where I recommend those sorts of books to follow up on this. So if you're an adult who doesn't yet read children's fiction and you want to get into it, I'm going to do a video where I recommend some for you. So I'm just going to finish on a last thought from Katherine Rundell, and if you haven't been convinced to go out and buy this essay and listen to it, because she talks about far more sort of the origins of children's literature and her other thoughts on it, this hopefully will convince you. So I really like this quote, because a lot of people believe that as an adult to read children's literature is somehow an immature thing to do, but she's got a lot to say about it, so I'm just going to leave it with her because she puts it so beautifully. There is a sense amongst most adults that we should only read in one direction, because to do otherwise would be to regress or retreat, to demature. But the human heart is not a linear train ride. If one followed the same pattern into adulthood, turning always to books of obvious increasing complexity, you'll be left ultimately with nothing but Finnegan's Wake and the complete works of the French deconstructionist theorists like Derrida to cheer your deathbed. The other difficulty with the rule is that it supposes that children's fiction can safely be discarded. I would say we do so at our peril, for we discard in adulthood a casket of wonders which, read with an adult eye, have a different kind of alchemy in them. W.H. Auden wrote, "There are good books which are only for adults because their comprehension presupposes adult experiences, but there are no good books which are only for children." I'm not suggesting that adults read only or even primarily children's fiction, just that there are some times in life when it might be the only thing that will do. If you enjoyed this video, please go and check out everybody I've mentioned who I'm going to link in the description box below. Thank you to everybody who contributed to this. I'm going to do a follow-up recommendation video like I've talked about, and I'm also going to talk a little bit more about what makes a children's book a children's book. I'm going to do a few more videos around this sort of thing going forward. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. I feel like it's a very niche video, so probably won't get a huge amount of views, but it's a subject that I'm really interested in. So if you've got any thoughts on it, please leave them in the comments below. If you've not been here before and you like the sound of that, please consider clicking like, making a comment, subscribing, and hopefully I will see you again here soon. Bye.